One of my personal interests is actually learning more about obsessive compulsive disorder, and perhaps that comes from the fact that actually very often I work with people who suffer from severe forms of obsessive compulsive disorder. And that's why perhaps recently I've decided to watch Korean movie The Plan Man. The main character, who's also referred to as Mr., he's actually suffering from severe form of OCD. So the main character, as a child, he was this extraordinary child with amazing memory. And his mother, she had really high hopes for him, but then unfortunately she has died in very tragic accident on stairs. And then the main character, he really blames himself for what has happened. He holds a lot of guilt, and perhaps some of the trauma that he suffered when his mom, she died, has contributed to him developing OCD. Let's start watching then.
예, 언제나 그렇듯이 정확한 시간에 상쾌한 기분으로 눈을 떴고요. 침대 시트를 교체하고 예, 아주 청결하게 하루를 시작했습니다. 은밀한 곳까지 깨끗하게 샤워를 한 후에 물론 예, 뒷정리는 에티켓이죠. 오늘은 수요일. 예, 수요일엔 스카이블루. 가장 중요한 노트를 챙기고 정확한 시간에.
So here we can see that the main character, he plans every little aspect of his day, and he does that according to his alarm clocks that he sets on his watch. Even when he's changing the bed sheets, that's done according to his alarm clock. He's also terrified of a contamination, so he changes the bed sheets, then he irons them. He sterilizes everything. When he takes the shower, straight after that, he starts cleaning the shower. He dries everything so there's not gonna be any mold. And the fear of contamination is actually one of the most popular reported in cases of OCD. And then we can see his obsession with things that being perfect. So even the fact that he follows the alarm clock, the fact that maybe his little bottles of sterilizers that are perfectly aligned, the fact that he even irons the bed sheet, then also his clothes are color-coded according to the weekdays, and in general the house order is impeccable. The obsession with making things align is not actually as common as the compulsion of, for example, washing, which is actually quite surprising to me, but that's what the research says. Alright, so let's keep watching.
아직도 내 말 안 믿는 사람 있다는 거 나도 알아요. 근데 진짜예요. 진짜 비둘기 똥을 맞고 죽은 사람을 봤어요. 아저씨! 장난해요? 웃지 마요. 짜증나게. 오늘도 집 가는데 비둘기들이 집 앞에 모여있어가지고 그중 하나랑 눈이 탁 마주친 거예요. 그래서 너무 무서워서 이 오비를 입고 나왔어요.
며칠 전에 사고가 났어요. 제가 잘못한 건 아니고 그 새끼가 끼어들었어요. 그러니까 어떻게 승질이 나니까 엑셀을 존나게 밟았어요. 존나게 밟아서 그 뒤를 받아버렸어. 물론 제가 좀 더 이렇게 참았었어야 되는데 그 새끼가 나를 쳐다보더라고. 아, 난 왜 아직도 이렇게 날 쳐다보면 이렇게 죽여버리고 싶지? 예, 그래도 뭐 오늘 아침엔 진짜 괜찮았습니다. 예. 엄마가 깨울 때도 화 안 냈고요. 앞으로도 좀 더 참으면서 열심히 살도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
아, 예.
용기 내주셔서 감사합니다.
이번에는 새로 오신 한정석 씨 얘기 좀 들어볼까요?
예, 제가 예, 적어봤는데요. 저는 뭐
미안해요. 내가 요즘에 너무 우울하고 외롭고 그런다. 그냥 너와
아까 미안했어요. 예? 아까 정말 미안했어요.
So here we could just see like a light form of a comedy where the main character and other people are actually in therapy, and we can see people with different presentations. So someone has a fear of pigeons, then we have someone with anger management, and then we have our main character who suffers from OCD. So in a real life scenario, I think it's actually quite unlikely that we would have group therapy like that of these really mixed presentations. In a real life scenario, it is actually more likely that people who suffer from OCD, they will just have one group therapy, and maybe someone who has anger management issues, they will have a different group therapy. And then we have the therapist who's obviously not dealing really well with her own life issues, as she's saying she's depressed and lonely, and obviously that should not happen in a real life scenario, and I hope it's not actually happening. But yes, obviously at the end of the day, this is a comedy, it should make us laugh. But actually in a real life, in some scenarios, in some situations, it is actually appropriate for therapists to include something from their personal life. But that will really depend on the relationship that they have with the client. It will really depend on the presentation that the client has. And it will depend whether that disclosure will bring any benefit to the client as well. So some modalities of therapy, they might actually allow that. Other modalities, like maybe psychodynamic, they will be really against any disclosure. But when the therapist will make the decision that they want to disclose something to the client, that would have to be done with the way so that the client will feel that it's for their benefit, not for the benefit of the therapist. And very often actually in therapy, it might happen that the client will ask us some personal questions, and most of them we don't answer them, but we just reply with the question, so what do you think? What makes you interested in that aspect of my life? What do you think? What that means to you? And that possibly then could give you some interesting insight into the client's reality. Alright, so let's go back to watching then.
날 만났으니까.
뭐 하는 거예요? 뭐 하는 거예요 지금?
한번 만져봐요. 3번. 더러운 것을 맨손으로 못 만진다.
아, 이거 더러운 게 아니라 이거 위험한 거예요. 고양이 기생충 톡소플라자 말고 걸리면은 뇌수상 망막변성 심하면은 이게 실명될 수도 있어요 지금.
도대체 그런 얘기는 어디서 주워 듣는 거예요? 나요. 1.8, 2.0. 자.
다른 거 다 해도 나 이거 진짜 이거는 못 해. 빨리 소정신 빨리 내려놔요. 이거 뭐 하는 거야 지금?
계산 좀 해주세요.
예. 잠깐만요. 이거 좀 잠깐 데리고 있어. 아저씨, 왜 이래요? 오줌 쌌어요? 아저씨! 그 고양이 기생충 그거 감염됐을지도 몰라요.
So here we can see that the main character is being exposed to what he fears the most. So his fear of contamination, and here it is actually presented in a quite extreme way. So he pee himself and then he faints. And obviously in a real life, you know, here we can laugh about it, but actually in a real life, people, they do suffer a lot because of their different fears. I think what this movie represents well about OCD is the fact that OCD can occupy your whole life. So every step you take, every decision you make, is actually made because of your OCD. And then because of that, that actually leads to emotional and also physical exhaustion. And the way how he was exposed in a movie I hope that doesn't really happen to people, but the way we expose people in therapy, for example, is done in a very collaborative way. So with the client, we decide how we're gonna do it, when we're gonna do it. So client has the sense of control over what's happening to them, where this one obviously was very unpredictable and caused him a lot of anxiety to the point where actually he collapsed. And even though those exposures that we do in therapy that are collaborative, done with the client, they might feel very cruel, but at the same time there's a lot of benefits to that. So one of them, for example, is the fact that with those exposure experiments, we try to disprove maybe some unhelpful beliefs that people they might have about certain things. Like for example here, the main character, he has the belief that if he's gonna touch the cat, he might actually go blind. By exposing him to the cat, we would try then to disprove that belief that maybe there is some very little chance of that happening, but if you touch the cat, if you're gonna stroke the cat, and then maybe if you're gonna wash your hands as normally you would before going and having meal, then nothing gonna perhaps happen to you. And in addition, very often when people they always maybe avoid certain things, or when they always perform certain obsessions, they never let themselves feel the actual feeling that comes with not involving in that vicious cycle of obsessions. So if someone, for example, always avoids touching cat because they're worried that they're gonna get contaminated, they don't know how it feels when you actually touch the cat, and they perhaps anticipating that they will just get this overwhelming anxiety and that maybe they will collapse. What actually the movie here is showing, but like I said, this is actually a very exaggerated vision of the anxiety. In a real life, it's very unlikely that that will happen. In a real life, it is very likely that anxiety will get very uncomfortable, but it is also very likely that the person will actually be able to control themselves. It is very likely that they're actually not gonna collapse. And the other aspect of being able to expose yourself to things that you fear is that you actually realize that that anxiety will actually drop itself down after some time. So it could be even after 5 or 10 minutes. And we actually have a research telling us that all emotions, they actually fade away with time. So whether they're positive emotions or negative emotions, so even a happiness fades away. So when something very, very pleasant happens to you, you might feel this intense sense of happiness, but then maybe 1 hour later, that emotion will fade away. You know, even thinking 5 hours later or the next day, that emotion will fade away. And that is exactly what happens to anxiety also. All right, so let's go back to watching then.
여기는 30년 전 생방송이 있던 방송국 스튜디오입니다.
진욱은 생방송이라고 긴장할 거 없어.
내 오줌 맛이 없다냐? 어디서 사기를 쳐? 너희들 뭐 하는 짓이야?
이봐요 아줌마, 애들끼리 놀다 보면 그럴 수도 있지.
뭐라고요, 아줌마?
고상한 척은 혼자 다 하더니만. 그렇게 잘났어 애한테 사기치는 거나 가르쳤어요?
아줌마가 잘 모르시나 본데 우리 지금요.
형님, 저기 한마디만 좀 부탁드리죠. 조작 방송이라는 얘기가 있던데 사실은 아이 유학은, 아이 미국 양은 어떻게 된 겁니까? 한 말씀만
지금 신경이 어떻게 되십니까?
사실은 먼저 제가 있었던 거 처음부터 사기였단 말에 대해서 국민이 사기라고 알고 있는데 지금 어떻게 하죠? 언제부터 계획된 겁니까? 한마디만 좀 부탁드립니다.
So here the main character tells us a story of when he was a child who had this extraordinary talent of memorizing everything. He tells us that at some point him and his mom were accused of him faking his talent, and then when him and his mom they try to run away from those accusations, his mom, she falls from stairs and then she dies. And then he witnessed that, and that obviously must have been a horrendous trauma for that young child. And it is very common that actually people who come to therapy to work on their OCD issues, they actually suffer some form of trauma in their childhood. Or it could be as one of their parents or caretakers maybe suffer from OCD themselves, but then because of that perhaps they might have not been as emotionally present for the child, and then perhaps as a result of that then child can develop OCD later in life. So here we can also see that the main character actually discloses all this very personal information in front of the people from his group therapy, but also other people, and this is very unlikely that will happen in a real life, but obviously that's just a movie. So there you have it, another review of a K-movie, this time in context of mental health. And if you are new to this channel, if this is the first time you're watching my video, then please subscribe and make sure you're gonna hit the notification bell. So every time when I upload a new video or a new short, you're gonna get notified, so you're not gonna miss out on this really interesting content. I'm gonna see you in the next one then. Bye!